What is up, everybody? Welcome back. My name is Aaron, and today we are going to be looking back on the best clubs and balls released in the year 2024. Here we go. As a club fitter, I've had the privilege of working with these clubs for a while now, so I really have a good grasp of what clubs are going to work best for what handicap ranges. Now, with that being said, I know what clubs work best for me, but golf isn't a one-club-fits-all type of sport, so make sure you're doing your own research at least a little bit before. And also, I would always recommend getting fit for clubs. It's just going to make your experience playing golf that much more enjoyable, and I always think it's worth it in the long run. So I'm going to break this video up into 5 different categories: driver, irons, wedges, putter, and golf ball. For the driver and irons, we're going to do 3 sections or 3 subcategories in that category. We're going to do a high handicap pick, a mid handicap pick, and a low handicap pick. And then for the wedges and putters and balls, it's going to be a little bit different, but we'll get there when we get there. We're going to start with driver, and we're going to start with the high handicap selection. So let's get into that now. So starting off with my high handicap driver pick, we're going to go with the Ping G430 10K. So the term MOI was the hot topic in the driver world in 2024, and we had 2 companies that were able to get their driver to 10,000 MOI, one being Ping, the other being TaylorMade. So for those unfamiliar with the term MOI, I'm not going to get all sciencey on you, but basically the more MOI a driver has, the more forgiving it is on off-centered hits. MOI stands for moment of inertia, and when we strike a driver off the toe or off the heel, the club wants to twist one way or the other, and the more MOI it has, the more the driver stays straight versus twisting one way or the other. Basically, this just helps bad shots be not as bad shots and good shots be even better. So the reason I picked this for the high handicappers is because obviously if you're a high handicapper, you're not going to be striking it out of the middle every time. Even, mid and low handicappers don't strike it out of the middle every time. So that extra MOI is really going to help. But then the other reason I picked it over the TaylorMade is the looks of it. So they squash down the head a little bit, so it's a little bit wider and a little bit longer, and the face isn't quite as deep this way. And I think that really promotes a confident-looking driver from the top down and behind the ball, which is really important for high handicap players. So based on looks and performance and just how well it did in my fittings throughout the course of the year, Ping G430 10K is going to be my driver pick for the high handicap golfers out there. So moving on to the mid handicap selection for driver, we are going to go with the Callaway AI Smoke Max. So this year, Callaway claimed that their use of AI in the face made their new driver the hottest and the most forgiving driver face that they've ever made. Now, I can't really say whether it was the use of the AI that did it for him, but I will say in my fittings back there, it did seem to be the most easy to launch driver really on the golf spectrum this year. So for me, why it excels in the mid handicap level is a combination of things. First, it's ease of launch. Second, it's forgiveness factor. And then 3, the low enough spin characteristics. And the reason I say low enough spin is because most of the time when you get into the more forgiving heads in other companies like TaylorMade, Ping, Cobra, you find that the spin jumps up a little bit and the ball starts to kind of balloon in the air, and you don't get that penetrating ball flight that you'd like to see. And I found that with the Max, you still got that forgiveness, which is important for mid handicappers, but it didn't spin up as much as the other ones. So you still had that, that distance and that penetrating ball flight that we wanted to see. So compared to the other Max heads and the other companies, players didn't have to sacrifice distance for forgiveness in the AI Smoke Max, and that's why it's my selection for the mid handicap level. So for the low handicap driver selection, we have 2. We have the QI10 and the QI10 LS, both from TaylorMade. While they don't have the 10,000 MOI of their brother in the QI10 Max, for players with higher swing speeds and more face control, this really was a no-brainer for me. So especially in the LS version, it seemed like this driver was by far the most forgiving for players with club head speeds over 105, 110 miles an hour. Like, it blew everything else out of the water, which is why it's just such an easy pick. While I do think there were maybe 1 or 2 other drivers that were a little bit hotter off the face than the QI10 and the QI10 LS this year, when we're talking low handicaps, it's a lot more important to hit 2 or 3 more fairways over the course of a round than have your average driving distance be 320 instead of 315, and that's really why I give the nod to the TaylorMade, the QI10. While I wasn't shocked that the QI10, the LS model, was a really low spinning beast of a driver, I was really pleasantly surprised with the QI10, just the regular model. It didn't seem to spin up as much as I would think it would for not being a low spin driver. This made it equally as good as the LS, which normally for lower handicap players and higher swing speed players, usually the LS version is the way we lean. But when we saw those players come in, at least when I did in my fittings, one of these two was usually the one that came out on top. And about half the time, I'd say it was probably the core model over the LS. So that's why I give the nod to both of them. So those are my driver picks for 2024. I cannot wait to see what these companies come out with next year. I'm sure it'll be great. And let's move on to the irons. So moving on to the irons now, I will preface this section by saying I am cheating a little bit because two of my selections were released in 2023, not 2024, but they did serve for that company's main iron line in 2024. So I'm still going to go ahead and count them. So starting off with the high handicap selection, my pick is going to be the JPX 923 Hot Metal family from Mizuno. We got the Hot Metal High Launch, and the Hot Metal Pro. So these are going to be a great option for anyone looking to find a little bit more distance, launch, and forgiveness in an iron. Maybe they don't need to work the ball as much, but they do need a little bit more distance and a little bit more help getting the ball up in the air. These are going to be a great option for you. So they do have the typical game improvement, thicker top line, and kind of chunkier sole. So they may look like kind of your typical run-of-the-mill game improvement iron, but their performance kind of spoke for itself and said otherwise. So these irons are going to go farther than a player's iron, let's say a blade, but I don't think everybody knows why, and I think it's important that people know that. Most companies nowadays, when they say longer, they really just mean less loft. So that's why these 7 irons are going, 200 yards now for higher swing speeds players, because they're not lofted traditionally, and they're just kind of cranking down that loft to be able to say they go farther. And, to their credit, they do go farther, but they're more like a 6 or a 5 iron loft than a 7 iron loft. So even though that was the case, I still found that these irons launched a little bit hotter, launched a little bit higher, and went a little bit farther than other irons that shared the same loft as them. So talking about feel now, that's one of the main reasons I picked this iron lineup. And to play a spoiler, that's also the reason that Mizuno is going to be on this irons list more than once. It shouldn't come as a shock to anybody that these aren't going to feel as good as a player's iron, a blade. They are a game improvement iron, so you're going to be sacrificing a little bit of that feel. But I will say, in the game improvement market, these stood out pretty heavily to me as feeling the best. So while they don't have that signature forged feel of a Mizuno iron, at the end of the day, they're still a Mizuno iron. They're still going to feel pretty good. As for looks, I think it's really tough to make a game improvement iron look that good. But I think Mizuno's done an okay job making them look not too offensive. They look good behind the ball. You don't see a ton of stuff sticking out behind, but there is going to be that thicker top line, and that's something that you're just not going to be able to get away from on a game improvement iron. But still, Mizuno's done a nice job with the looks. So the only real downsides to these irons are going to be super normal game improvement, cons. They're not going to spin at all, and they're going to have little to no workability. But to combat that, the people that are playing these irons probably aren't trying to work the ball from right to left or left to right. They're just trying to hit it straight and as far as they can. And these irons do a great job of that. So I really don't see the downside just being anything too crazy. And that's kind of why I went with these for my pick for the game improvement irons. Moving on to the mid-handicap selection, I'm going to go with the latest version of the Titleist T200 irons. In my opinion, the T200s blend feel and spin with that little bit of forgiveness better than probably any other iron in this mid-handicap range. They are forged iron, so they're not going to feel maybe like a blade, but they are going to feel much more blade-like than game improvement like, I would say. And on that same note, they do have a very compact head shape, and while it doesn't look like a blade from behind the ball, it looks more bladey than it does game improvement-y, if that makes sense. So basically, it looks and feels a little bit more like a player's iron, while it still has that little bit chunkier backside to it, and it's going to have that little more forgiveness than you'll find in just a straight player's iron. So it does have a perimeter weighting system, so it is going to be a little bit more forgiving on those off-center hits, and it also has a really hot face across the entire face. So on those off-center hits, it's going to go just as far, and that's why it's so forgiving. All that combined, and you have a pretty great iron for the mid-handicap level. So the T200 from Titleist is my pick for mid-handicap, and we're going to move on to the low-handicap selection now. Also in the mid-handicap selection, I want to give a quick honorable mention to the Ping i530. I do think the T200 performs a little bit better, but I just want to say that this is probably the best mid-handicap level looking iron that I've ever seen. It looks kind of like the Blueprint S from Ping, which again looks really good. And I'm really impressed with the looks that the i530 has. So if you're in that market and you just want something that looks really good, go with the Pings. So for the low handicap selection, I am going back to Mizuno, and I'm going to go with the 241s, the 243s, and the 245s. If anyone's overly surprised that Mizuno made the irons list twice, you shouldn't be. They're great irons. They're kind of well known to be great irons, especially in their players' irons. But the 241s are going to be your traditional player's blade. They're as thin of a top line as you can get. The 243s are going to be a CB, so they're going to have a cavity back, and they're going to be a tiny bit thicker on that top line, but they're going to offer a little bit more behind the ball to look at. They're not going to be that straight blade that a lot of people like to look at. And the 245s are going to be the easiest launching of the three, and they're going to look like a bigger version of the 245, just a little bit thicker and a little bit more behind the ball than the 245, but they have that same Mizuno shape. Now, with all players' irons or blades, you're kind of going to get the same profile for all of them. They're going to spin a ton, they're going to look great, they're going to feel great, but you're pretty much sacrificing any forgiveness for all of that. So on off-center hits, they're not going to go anywhere, and even on the middle hits, they're going to spin more, so they're still not going to go quite as far as anything over here. So when it comes to actually picking a favorite player's iron, it really just comes down to sound, feel, and looks. Now, Mizuno's slogan is "Nothing feels like a Mizuno," and let me tell you, they are not lying. They have a signature forging process that happens over in Japan. I don't know exactly what they do, but I don't really care because they all feel so phenomenal that I just want them to keep doing what they're doing. The other thing that I think sets them apart is their looks. The 243 is kind of just your normal looking CB, albeit it is a good looking one. But the 241 and the 245 I think look so phenomenal. They look just like your classic blade, not too much going on. And for your better player that likes something simple and classic to look at, you're not going to find much better than the 241 other than like a Mira. The performance is awesome as well. They perform like any typical player's iron. They spin a ton. They're super workable. They feel amazing. I can't stress that enough, how good they feel. But in today's market, a lot of players' irons do that. So for me, picking a favorite is just kind of nitpicking. And like I said, the looks, the feel, and just the confidence that you have with the Mizuno is kind of why I'm picking it for the lower handicap. So moving on to wedges now, we're going to have 3 categories with 4 total wedge picks. We're going to do 1 cavity back wedge, 2 classic blade style wedges, and then we're going to do 1 full face groove wedge pick. So starting with the cavity back wedge pick, my pick is going to be the CBX4 from Cleveland. So there aren't going to be too many options in this category, but for me, the CBX4 stands out pretty far away from the rest. For not being a blade design, it still looks really good, and that extra thick sole behind the ball is going to really help golfers that struggle with chunks or just miss hits in general with wedges. I also really enjoy the look of the milling on the side of the face and on the grooves, and that's not just for show either. That milling actually helps your wedge retain spin when it cuts through wet conditions. This wedge also has zip core, which has been a staple with Cleveland for a while. Basically, it strips some weight out of the hosel, and all that does is shift the center of gravity a little bit more towards the toe. That's going to increase the feel and the forgiveness of this wedge, which really is a benefit for the players playing a cavity back wedge to begin with. The only downside of this wedge really is that because of the thicker sole, it's essentially impossible to open it up and play, those flop shots or be too creative around the greens. But it's kind of the same thing with going back to the game improvement irons. The players that are playing a cavity back wedge, they're probably not consistent enough to be opening up the face to begin with. They're just trying to get something running and get something on the green. And that's what this wedge is really designed for. It's not designed to be opened up. So I really don't see that as too much of a con. So overall, if I think you're looking for a cavity back wedge with a little bit more forgiveness, but still the looks and a little bit of the feel that you get in a blade style wedge, I really think the CBX4 is going to be the best pick, and it is my pick for the cavity back style wedge. So moving on to my classic blade design picks, we are going to go with the SM10 from Titleist and the Ping S159. So when it comes to wedges, I think that the style of wedge, so cavity back, classic blade design, or full face grooves, the style is really important. However, once you get into that certain style, blade design specifically, I think in today's day and age, it doesn't matter quite as much what you go with compared to the irons and driver. Every company nowadays is going to make a wedge that spins a ton, looks great, feels great. So really it's going to come down to player preference as far as feel, looks. You're really going to have to nitpick when you go to pick your actual wedge. For some people, it comes down to looks behind the ball, how the wedge frames the ball. And for other people, it's just if I have, Ping irons, I'm going to get Ping wedge. If I have Mizuno irons, I'm going to get Mizuno wedges. And that's not a bad strategy either. So basically with this blade wedge selection, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying personally, this is what I prefer. For example, if you like a high toe look, the TaylorMade is going to be your best option. If you like a classic blade design like I do, one of these two is going to be your best option. If you like that kind of squashed down look where it's a little thinner heel to toe, the new Opus from Callaway is going to be a really good option for you. So basically with wedges, it just comes down to personal preference. So for the Ping S159, I think that it looks really good behind the ball. It frames the ball really, really nicely. It also has that tightly spaced grooves, which also personally I think look really good. I've heard people don't like those at all. I know people that love them. So again, with wedges, personal preference. Then for the Vokey SM10s, Vokeys have kind of been the gold standard for wedges for years now, and I'm not mad at it. It's a really good wedge. If you want like a classic looking wedge, look no further than the Vokey SM10. They look phenomenal, they feel phenomenal, they perform really well. So you're never gonna go wrong picking up a Vokey. So just to say it again, with blade style wedges, it's really gonna come down to personal preference. Just for me, I prefer to look at the Ping S159 or the SM10, and that's why those are my picks for the blade style wedge. So last wedge category we got here, we got the full face groove, and I am gonna pick the high toe 4 from TaylorMade. So for players who either want a wedge that inspires confidence or whether they want a wedge that they can have full confidence in opening up and getting creative around greens, full face wedges are becoming more popular and they are a great option for those type of players. As far as the high toe 4 though, I think the rusty finish looks really good, but it also serves a purpose on really sunny days. Sometimes when you open the club face like this, if your eyes are up here and you're opening the club face all the way, that sun can beam right off the face and right into your eyes. I've had it happen to me, and there have been times where I wish I had a finished wedge like this. Also, the super high toe gives the player using it supreme confidence that if they need to open it up and they need to hit a big high flop shot over a bunker or something, that they can do it and they're not going to run out of room on the face. I also just found that the turf interaction with these wedges was really, really clean and really, really smooth. So on those 30 to 60, tricky pitch shots, it really just kind of glided through the turf, and I thought it did a really good job on those shots, kind of allowing you to play them however you want. So as far as the full face options go, there are a ton of them out there, but for me, the pick is definitely going to be the high toe 4 from TaylorMade. So moving on to putters, I'm really only going to be talking about 2 putters. Because I really feel like this year there were 2 putters that stood out far ahead of every other putter on the market. We're going to start with lab putters. So they were started in 2014 by Bill Pressey, and they were kind of thought of as kind of a joke gimmick club, but quickly they've turned into one of the hottest putters on the market. So now you can see them used by some of the best golfers in the world: Adam Scott, Dustin Johnson, Ben On, Phil Mickelson, Will Zalatoris, the list goes on, of players that now use lab putters in competition. They're also being seen more in amateurs bags across the world, and I will have a full lab review coming out here soon, so make sure you're staying tuned for that. But basically, this face is pointed at its target at all times. So while other putters have torque or toe hang, lab putters have 0 torque. So basically, while other putters, if you held them loose like this, they would kind of twist with the toe down. Lab putters, you can have them however you want, and they're going to stay that way. So once you have it pointed at your target, it wants to stay pointed towards that target. So one of the main downsides to lab when they first started was that their putters were kind of ugly, but now that the Mez has been out for a little bit and they have other options, they have the Link, they have the DF3, which is a little bit shrunken version of this. It's a little bit easier for golfers to kind of wrap their mind around using a putter that looks like this. The only downside that I've seen with lab is that speed control takes a little bit to get accustomed to. So basically, with our bodies, we associate torque with weight. So because these putters have 0 torque, they feel a little bit lighter than putters that we're used to, and they feel a little bit lighter than they actually are. Because of this, the speed control can take a little bit to get down, but I will say, once you do have it down, you are in possession of probably the greatest putter that money can buy. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't mention the Spider. 14 wins on the PGA Tour, 7 coming from Scottie Scheffler, 2 from Rory McIlroy. Nelly Korda had herself a pretty solid year, you could say. All of them used the Spider, and actually Scottie even won a gold medal with it. So the resume is there for the Spider. So there are a few things that make the Spider such a good putter. First is just the classic mallet shape, which allows TaylorMade to kind of push the weight all the way back to the back of the putter. All that does is just create a higher MOI, more forgiving putter on off-centered hits. The insert on Spiders as well have these grooves that are pointed 45 degrees down. So basically they kind of latch onto the ball and promote a really pure roll. It also feels really soft and has kind of a muted noise, which I prefer. That's personal preference. You know, I like that softer, quieter sound. You might like the loud ping. You know, that's all up to you. Personally, I really like the sound and the feel of the Spider. So as far as putters go for 2024, this was by far the easiest category to pick, just because I believe so heavily in the technology of Lab, and Spider had probably one of the greatest years in golf history for one single golf club. So that made my job really easy when it came to picking putters. So moving on to golf balls, I will be picking 1 or 2 balls from 3 different price points. I will be picking a premium golf ball, a mid-grade golf ball, and then a bargain or a cheaper golf ball. So for my premium picks, I'm going to go with the Pro V1 from Titleist and the Strixon Z-Star, obviously from Strixon. But there's also the Tour BX from Bridgestone that's really good. The TP5 line from TaylorMade's really good, and the Chrome Tour from Callaway's are another really good golf ball. So there are a lot of good options, but let me tell you why I went with these two. Performance-wise, as far as spin numbers, carry distances, stuff like that, you're not going to find too much of a difference. Maybe a yard or two, maybe 100 to 200 spin. But you're not going to find too much of a difference between these balls. The reason that I went with these two specifically is really durability. For example, I bought a box of the Tour BXs from Bridgestone, and I really like them. I think they're a really good golf ball. But on the second hole, I hit a bad shot on a par 3, ended up in a bunker, and I hit a pretty solid bunker shot. I didn't chunk it. I didn't find the equator or anything like that. I hit a pretty good shot, and there was a big old scuff right on the side of it from one bunker shot, brand new right out of the package. So that was a little bit of a turnoff for me. These two balls specifically lasted longer than the other ones, just the covers did, and they still had phenomenal performance. So that's just they're going to last a little bit longer. I'm going to be able to use one ball for just a little bit longer than the others, and that's something to really consider, especially if you don't get free golf balls, which I'm sure most of us don't. That's one thing to consider is the durability in your golf ball. So moving on to the mid-grade category, my picks are going to be the Strixon Q-Star Tour and the Tour Response, specifically the Tour Response Stripe from TaylorMade. So for this category, really to me, it comes down to which golf ball is going to sound and feel like a premium golf ball, while also understanding that there's going to be a little bit of a drop-off in performance. So for me, the Tour Response Stripe is a super soft feeling golf ball. It still has an okay amount of spin around the green, not as much as a Pro V or a TP5 or a Z-Star or anything like that. And personally, I really like the Stripe to putt with. That's a personal preference type thing. I find it's really easy to align, and I also think TaylorMade was really smart for bringing that out in the TP5 and TP5X. As for Strixon, it's really the same thing as the Tour Response, just without the stripe. So for me, that's why the Tour Response takes the cake by a slight margin in this mid-grade category. So moving on to the value golf balls, I'm going to go with the Speed Soft from TaylorMade and the Super Soft from Callaway. So in this category, you really have to understand that you're not going to get anywhere near the performance of the last two categories we've seen, especially not the quality golf balls that we've seen, or the premium golf balls that we've seen, sorry. This category is really just about finding the best value for your dollar. These balls are typically going to be bought by your higher handicapper that's losing a bunch of balls throughout the course of a round, and for them, it definitely makes sense to buy these versus spending $55 a dozen on Pro Vs, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what ball you're losing if you're losing it. You might as well go with the cheaper ones. So as far as performance, like I said, you're not going to get the performance of the premium golf balls, but both of these, they don't feel quite like a rock. And when struck well, they do offer a little bit of grab on, your wedge or your short iron shots. The upside with these balls, really this whole category, is because everything is going to be a 2-layer construction, they're going to go a little bit farther. So, you're not going to have anywhere near the feel or the spin, but they are going to be a decent, distance golf ball. So that's going to do it, guys. I want to thank you all for watching. These have been my picks for the 2024 golf clubs and balls of the year. Drop in the comments, which ones you agree with. If you agree with all of them, I appreciate that too. Guys, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button for more content like this, and make sure you're commenting what videos you want to see from me in the future. I'll make sure I get to them. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.